I still love Sebastian Stan, but this character, giving me the creeps. Hello, Horror Nights in family, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, your home for scary movie reviews. You guys look so nice today. Thank you so much for joining me. And it must be Wednesday, which means we're gonna be talking about a horror movie. And I am so excited about doing this in-depth review on the film Fresh. So let's do it. Okay, horror fam, the Hulu original film Fresh was just released last week. And when I tell you that I am so excited and stoked to be doing this film for you today, well, it's an understatement. In this video, I'm going to be doing an in-depth review and after my opinion on the film overall, which characters I liked, some that I didn't, and also some theories and questions that I have about the film. So make sure you stick around until the end. So this film has a lot of blood, a lot of gore, and it stars Sebastian Stan, who most know as Bucky Barnes, and Daisy Edgar Jones, who I know from the quarantine hit series Normal People. Fresh was directed by Mimi Cave, and it was written by Lauren Kane. And the film follows the horrors of modern dating, seen through one woman's battle to survive her new boyfriend's unusual appetite. Warning, if you venture further into this video, there are lots and lots of spoilers, so if you haven't seen the film Fresh, I encourage you to go watch it and then come back. Also, do you guys like my new crew neck? You do? Okay, so before we get into this video, let's hear a word from our sponsors. Yes, that's right, guys. Today's video is sponsored by Vintage Comic Stuff, your one-stop shop for vintage comic t-shirts. Whether you're a comic book fanatic or looking for the perfect gift, you'll find what you're after. Listen, I am always looking for the perfect tee or hoodie to throw on for a video or a quick stop at my local movie theater. So I was pumped when this brand reached out. It's super comfortable and definitely adding to my collection of tees and hoodies. I'm also digging the comic book inspired prints on them. If you guys want your own, just click on the link in my description. It will conveniently link you right over to Amazon, and it ships almost anywhere. Shipping is extra depending on where it is ordered. They have tons and styles of prints too, so check them out. All right, let's get back to Fresh. Okay, so the film begins and we are introduced to our main protagonist, Noah, who is scrolling through a dating app called Puzzle Piece. Also guys, buckle up because this is going to be a long one. Interesting. And it looks like she is waiting for her date when she gets a phone call from her best friend, Molly. And we can tell right away that whoever this guy is that she is waiting for her date is a little on the cheap side because he tells her, FYI, this restaurant only takes cash. Molly, her BFF, tells her to leave. I also have a BFF named Molly. Hi, Molly. So Noah makes her way into the restaurant, and she is being entertained by her date, who is telling her his obsession with hot sauce. We then get this little nugget of a scene that we saw in the trailers when her date, Chad, is explaining to her the fundamentals of wearing a dress and being feminine. Then he proceeds to wrap up all the leftovers, including Noah's. And he's also rude to the server because his ugly scarf dropped into the noodles. What's that saying? Pay attention to how your date treats service industry people. Yeah, fuck your scarf, bro. And as I mentioned, his name is Chad. I knew a Chad. And he was, well, annoying too. Sorry, Chad, if you're watching. Once outside, Chad proceeds to tell Noah that she's cute, that they should do it again, and he leans in, to which Noah completely denies his advances, and Chad switches up real quick. Basically tells her she's not cute and how she'll never find a guy because she's a stuck-up bitch. See what I said about Chads? Noah is now making her way to her car and she spots a hooded figure behind her and she starts picking up the pace. We can tell she's getting a little nervous at that point. And unfortunately, as women, we assume the worst. But then we see this hooded figure come into the light, and it's just a father carrying his baby. So this is where we get a glimpse into Noah as being very aware of her surroundings. So just keep that in mind for later. Next, we get to meet Molly, her BFF. At a boxing class, Noah is confiding in her about her dating woes. I'm also already loving the dynamic between these two characters, which I'm going to talk about a little later in this video, so stay tuned. We learn that Noah is a graphic designer, and she is just continuing to match dudes on this dating app. And she's striking out left and right. She then realizes that she's out of snacks, so she heads to the grocery store. And there she meets Steve in the fresh produce section of the store. See what I did there? They proceed to banter back and forth about cotton candy flavored grapes. Have you guys ever had those? They actually do taste like cotton candy. He then insists that she tries the grapes, and he hits on her. I love Sebastian Stan. Also, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button because I put new horror-related content topic videos out every single Wednesday and Saturday. He then asks for her phone number in a very super charming way, telling her that he's going to share this grape story with his sister and his niece. She is now confiding in Molly over lunch the next day and tells her that he hasn't texted her yet. But oh, lo and behold, in the very next scene, we hear the phone chime and we see a smile spread across Noah's face. She is now on this lovely little date with Steve in a much nicer place than she was when she was on the date with Chad. The two then are having the normal first date conversation, like, where are you from? What do you do? And this is where you find out that Steve is a plastic surgeon. We also find out that Noah is pretty much solo in this big world because her dad passed away, she has no siblings, and her mother do not speak. We also learn that Steve's mother has passed away, so the two bond over having dead parents. The date continues and it seems to be going well, and we find out that Steve doesn't have any social media, which may ring strange to some people, but honestly, when I meet people that don't have social media, it's a little refreshing. But on the other hand, after watching this film, I may need to rethink that. There is also this really cool camera work with the lighting and angles. I can tell that the filmmakers really paid attention, and we see this many a more time in the rest of the film as well. So then Noah really starts spilling her guts to this stranger and tells him that she doesn't really believe in love and she hates dating. I can relate. But honestly, it's done really well. She's coming off more vulnerable than she is kind of like off-putting. And the date ends and the two are outside. And they share a very cute romantic little kiss. And by that, I mean they have a hardcore makeout on the streets and then head back to Noah's apartment. And well, you know, things get a little spicy. The next morning, Noah wakes up and we can tell she is still very smitten with Steve as she takes a quick little sleeping candid photo of him. And then he wakes up and he seems just as smitten as well. She then calls her bestie Molly to fill her in on what happened, and she, being the friend that most likely that I am too, she asks her friend for his social media, to which she says he doesn't have any. And Molly sees this as a red flag, but I digress. So Noah and Steve are on their second date at Noah's apartment, and Steve says this very interesting line, and he says that he doesn't eat animals. So after that conversation, Noah then tells him about her best friend Molly, how she wants them two to meet, and how he would probably like her. And Steve just continues to be as charming as ever. And the two are now dancing around her apartment. This is definitely some rom-com type feel, but considering it's a horror movie, we all know that something is about to pop off sooner than later. Steve then asks Noah if he wants to go away together, and Noah, who is just soaking up all the love juices, says, "Why not?" When Noah tells Molly about this whole thing, Molly, being the good friend she is a little like, girl, maybe you need to slow down a little bit, and about this mysterious man that is taking her best friend away for the weekend, as she should. The two are now venturing to Steve's place because apparently the traffic is really bad and they're going to leave really early in the morning. Steve then tells her that he's going to be taking her to this place called Cottage Grove. Oh, and then we learn that the cell phone service in the area of where they're driving is not good and that it's better at Steve's house. And Steve lives super far in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the woods. But nonetheless, his house is very, very big and very, very nice. Then we get our first creepy moment when Noah asks Steve about the Wi-Fi because she's trying to text Molly to tell her where she is. And he casually says, "It must have gone out," and then quickly changes the conversation. He then makes her a drink, and my horror senses are tingling. And I'm wondering if he has spiked her drink. I still love Sebastian Stan, but this character, giving me the creeps. And then things start to get fuzzy. Literally get fuzzy for Noah. She then tries to get up, but then falls down, down, down. And then we get an opening title scene about halfway through the film. I really liked this scene, which I'm gonna talk about a little bit later in this video, because the scene is still happening, even as we're getting like the title cards and the character names and the directed and starring, etc. Noah then comes to and she realizes that she is on a bed. Steve is sitting across from her and tells her that he has drugged her. And then she realizes that she is chained to the floor. And then, of course, it starts to set in that she is essentially being kidnapped. Then Steve reveals his true self to her. He tells her that he is going to sell her meat and how people pay him a lot of money for it because that's what some people are into. He also tells her that he isn't going to kill her yet, because the meat is better the fresher it is. We now check back in with Molly, who is getting a little worried about her friend because she hasn't heard from her. But alas, Steve has taken her phone and texted Molly and said that they're in Cottage Grove, and then he sends a picture. Meanwhile, Noah is screaming, locked away in this meat dungeon. We then hear a voice come through the other side of the wall where Noah is, and it's a girl named Penny, who reveals that she is slowly being eaten. She's coming off like kind of nonchalant in a nice way, which is kind of odd because we have to assume that she's looking and probably not feeling too great. And this is where we realize that Steve picks his victims based on their connection to other people, like their friends and their family. Because if they don't have any of these things, then no one's going to come looking for them. Then we hear about another girl who's also been kidnapped, and her name is Melissa. But Penny tells Noah that Melissa has pretty much gone insane at this point. Okay, so before I explain this next scene, I have to remind you of the little BFF lingo that Noah and Molly have, which is when one says love you, the other one says love you more. So as Molly is texting Noah, aka Steve, she says, "Love you." And Steve just sends back a heart, which is sending off all these alarms in Molly's head because she knows that something is going on. Also, remember that photo that Steve sent Molly? Well, Molly did a Google reverse search on the image, and it's from some like random hiking website. Also, make sure to like this video so I know, and I will make more. Okay, so in this next scene, we get this really strange dance routine from Steve, who's in his kitchen, with this girl, Melissa's severed leg just right on his island. And we see him packing up boxes for his customers that include the tenderized pieces of leg meat. He also throws in some of the chosen one's belongings and like a little photo card with their picture on it and their name. And these packages are packed up and picked up by some unknown dark web security guard guy. Steve is now back downstairs with Noah, and Noah asks if he can take a shower. Steve then says, "Do you promise to be a good girl?" And we can see that as Steve is bringing her back upstairs, Noah is really paying attention to her surroundings like I mentioned in the beginning of this film. Noah then tries to run, but Steve overpowers her and knocks her out. Then in this very disturbing next scene, we see that Noah is now on the operating table and Steve is cutting off her butt. Okay, so back with Molly. She is back at the bar where Steve and Noah had their first date. And she's also low-key interrogating the bartender Paul, who she knows from previous romantic relationships. And she begs him, but like gracefully begs him to just give her Steve's last name. Okay, so Noah is now back in her dungeon and she is talking to Penny. And we can see that Noah is laying on her stomach for obvious reasons. We also find out that Noah was maybe the only victim of Steve's that he slept with. Okay, so back with Molly. We find out that Steve's name is actually not Steve. It's Brandon Steve Kemp. And guys, we learn that Brandon, whatever his name is actually married and has 2 kids. And Molly, being the full PI that she is, finds out where they live and goes to the house. Okay, so back with Noah. Sorry, the scenes just keep like, brr, 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 brr. You know, you've seen the movie. But anyway, let's keep continuing. So then we have the scene with Steve and Noah. And she asks him, why did you sleep with me? And he kind of just like says like, oh, because I liked you. But then he just like brushes it off. And then he gets up and goes to leave and tells her to relax because stress and fear is not good for the meat. And then he leaves. I gotta say, Steve is one really messed up dude, which we're gonna talk about a little bit later. So we see that Steve has given Noah some magazines to read. And while Noah is perusing through these magazines, she spots a note from one of Steve's previous victims. And it says, if you're reading this, it means he likes you. Use it to your advantage. Interesting. Also in a previous scene, we see Steve is carrying a screaming Penny down the hallway. And we also get these really like quick cuts to the men who are eating this human meat. Okay, so back with Molly. Molly, being the truest BFF ever, goes in to confront the people that are in this house. She knocks on the door and the wife opens. And this is where we meet Anne for the first time. She invites Molly in and Molly then informs her that, hey, do you know where my friend is? I think your husband's having an affair. And she also drops a pin at her location to send to Paul, you know, just in case. Okay, so at this point in the film, we know that Steve has taken a liking to Noah. So Noah is really just trying to play into this as much as she can. So when Steve comes back into her meat dungeon, she asks him what it tastes like. And he tells her that if it's done correctly, it's exquisite. Okay, guys, this next scene gave me so much anxiety. Molly is still sitting in the house of the Kemps. And then we hear the front door unlock and Anne says, oh, my husband is home, you need to leave. And then we see Steve walk into the living room. So as Molly is about to leave, she decides to call Noah's cell phone. And we hear the phone ring inside of Steve's jacket pocket. But then Steve's skinny little wife comes up behind Molly and knocks her out and hits her in the head. So after that happens, Steve then decides he wants to invite Noah to have dinner with him later that night. And we can obviously assume what the main dish will be because their last conversation, she asked him what it tasted like. We also learn that Steve's wife, Anne, knows exactly what he is doing, which is bonkers because we see that she has a prosthetic leg. And this made me think, was she a victim? I'm going to touch on this later in this video, so definitely stick around for that. Okay, so at this point, we aren't sure if Molly is dead or alive. We also learn that Steve also likes to eat his victims. And like maybe this is where his obsession with this new career path started. I also have to say that Steve is very organized with his parts. All right, so now it's dinner time and Steve and Noah are sitting down to a nice little romantic date. They're having some wine and we get the inside scoop for Steve's love of cannibalism. While all this is going on, of course, Noah is paying attention to her surroundings again. Okay, so the scoop is that Steve first tried human meat when he was 19 years old. And how he had a relatively normal life growing up. He had nice friends, he had a nice family, but he was obsessed with the taste and the texture of human meat. I can also tell that Noah is really trying her best to stay calm considering the topic of a conversation. He then offers her spaghetti and one big human meatball. And she takes a bite, and we also get this montage again of these elite men also eating their dinners for the night, made of humans. So Noah continues eating, and we can see that Steve is starting to take even more of a liking to her. Okay, so in this next scene, we see the operating table, and unfortunately, Steve has Molly on it now. And then we skip over to Paul, who is just getting more and more worried. Another interesting thing about this is Noah and Penny hear Molly kind of moaning and groaning as Steve is taking her up the stairs, and they both realize that he has another victim. Of course, Noah is completely unaware that it's her friend. Steve then decides to invite Noah to another dinner, and he gives her a very ugly pink dress. Pink, which I assume is like the color of flesh, you know. Okay, so as I was watching this scene, guys, I was like, oh my God, is Steve/Brandon making Noah eat her best friend right now? And Steve is totally smitten with our main protagonist, Noah, because his wife is calling him and texting him, asking when he'll be home. And Steve just puts his phone in a box along with his wedding ring. Along with the wedding ring and his phone, we see that there's also a few of Noah's things. Okay, so back to the dinner. Their first course is pate, aka liver. But Steve made it spicy with some rosemary and garlic. And I just can't keep thinking that she may or may not be eating Molly. But apparently it's Melissa. We also get a little bit more insight into Steve, who is obsessed with this idea of humans surrendering themselves to one another because it shows that it's a sign of love. I also have to be honest with you guys, this whole dynamic between the two of them is really odd. I understand what she is doing here, but I'm also kind of getting like Stockholm Syndrome vibes. Steve then shows Noah his own collection of his victims' belongings behind the picture that Noah was interested in the beginning of this film. It's like he has these little cubbies with the girls' photos and some of their belongings. And we also finally get to see what Penny looks like. And then Noah spots Molly's phone case. But I don't know how she did this. She remains very calm. All right, so they're back to dinner and they're eating their main course, which is breast meat. Steve then makes this really weird comment, basically insinuating that they are eating Molly's boob. Noah seems to be cracking a little bit, but I mean, I cannot blame her considering the circumstances right now. And she starts crying, which of course is a part of her plan. So she's crying, Steve leans in to calm her down, and he explains to her that he knew that she was different from the first time that they met. And he leans in for a little kiss. And then he realizes that he actually never handcuffed her again, which also adds into this whole trust thing that Noah is trying desperately to build with him. Okay, guys, I will admit that this movie is very long. Obviously, you can tell because of the minute marker that we're on right now. But spoiler alert, I am enjoying it, but it's definitely a slow burn for me. So the two are now in Steve's bedroom, and they're about to, you know, and I'm just like waiting for something to happen, and oh boy does it. Well, my friend, she decides to bite off his and then smear toothpaste in his eyes and grab his keys. She then is able to barricade Steve in his bedroom, and she runs down into the basement to save Penny and also save Molly. All the while, Steve is just like bleeding profusely from and running after her. Okay, so this is when a ton of things start happening. And it's the three leading ladies now against this bleeding, limbless Steve. Finally, after much scuffling around the kitchen and beating each other up, Molly is able to kick Steve in the head, knocking him out. The three are now running in the open field that's behind Steve's home. And Paul the bartender arrives because remember, Molly had dropped a pin earlier to him. But then he hears the gunshot because Steve now has a gun. And he gets back into his car and just like reverses right out of there. Honestly, same. And this was definitely a nice little like comic relief moment considering how intense the last scenes were. I also think Paul leaving was kind of a nod to the female lead. So I'm making this statement that these women and women in general don't need a man to come save them. Oh, and then the wife shows up with that bodyguard that we saw earlier, and she sees like the mess of the kitchen. So at this point, the girls are hiding in the field, and Steve is just trying to find them all. And he's just covered head to toe in blood. Penny, being the queen that she is, runs right at Steve and knocks him over. And then the rest of them all just kind of run at him from all sides. and then Noah grabs the gun and blasts him right in the face. But before she does that, she tells Steve to smile, which is something that he did throughout the entirety of this film. So the wife and the bodyguard are now making their way into the field, and they find Steve's dead body. And his wife kind of just looks at him like, and tells the bodyguard to quickly get his body on ice. So this is where some of my theory starts coming in, like, is she the mastermind behind all of this? I'll talk about that in a minute. So somewhere in the scuffle of shooting Steve in the head and telling him to smile, Noah drops her phone. And she runs back to get it, and then she is confronted by the wife, who is pretending to be one of Steve's victims. But then obviously we know that she's not, and she jumps on Noah and starts choking her. Remember, Noah at this point has no idea that Steve's married, has no idea what his wife looks like. But the wife knows what Noah looks like because she saw her ID in the box where Steve had his wedding ring and his cell phone in. So with very little time left in the film, Noah is almost about to pass out like dead. But remember, she still has the keys, and she's able to jab the wife in the neck with the keys. And Molly is back to the rescue, and she whacks the wife's head in with a shovel and says this really funny and iconic line, and she says, "I went to you for help, and bitches like you were the problem." I mean, can we say final girls? The two then share a laugh that Steve was married, and the film ends with the text message from Chad that says, "You up." I told you guys, Chads are the worst. Okay guys, opinion time. I really enjoyed this film a lot. I thought it was a fresh take on the horror genre, pun intended. I also love seeing like this downfall and dark side of online dating because I think that whole thing is just so tragic in itself. There have been one or two horror films that have touched on online dating. The one that comes to mind is Bad Match. Honestly, a pretty good film. If you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to watch it if you liked this film. Interesting enough, this film looks at dating, more so maybe like online dating, how we all are essentially pieces of meat, and sometimes we get tossed aside for something better. Also, I really liked how we didn't get the opening credits until about 33 minutes into the film. It's kind of like, hey, heads up, pay attention because things are about to get crazy. It also kind of separates this whole like rom-com-esque feeling that I had versus like the horror movie feeling. I think the split title was really a clever idea. Also, can we talk about the really fun play on words, meet cute? And of course, as I mentioned, we got Steve and Noah meeting their meet cute in the fresh produce section. The use of lighting, the angles, and the music was also really good too. A fun fact, the writer of this film, Lauren King, has written several rom-coms in the past and then tried her hand at horror. Okay, so we have to talk about the characters next. I really liked, but I really hated Steve. He was the character that we all needed to hate. He did unspeakable things to these women, and it was justice to see his downfall. He was sadistic, evil, entitled, and just a horrible human being. But man, was he so entertaining because he was so evil. So as I mentioned earlier, I really did enjoy Noah and her best friend Molly. I think this film really made sure to touch on the female bonds and how female friendships are really important. And because sometimes our female friends can be more important to us than some family members. Steve's wife, Anne, was also very creepy, and honestly, I wanted to know more about her because she played her role so well. Okay, so now let's talk about my theories and some questions that I have. First, about Steve's wife, Anne. I honestly think that she might have been a victim of Steve's, considering that we saw that she had a prosthetic leg. And I think that Steve fell in love with her and saved her life and obviously made her his wife. I mean, we saw him get all gushy towards Noah, so I don't think that it's a far reach of a theory. We also get this really odd scene of her like pushing her face back, and then immediately after, Steve is like holding her face in the same fashion. Considering we know that Steve is a plastic surgeon, I'm not really surprised that she is the way that she is. Her reaction to seeing her dead husband was also a little odd, but also really funny. But I mean, she probably hated him and just stayed married to him for the free plastic surgery and the cushy lifestyle. And like I said, he probably hacked her leg off. Okay, so my question is, What happens to our final girls, Noah, Penny, and Molly? We have to assume that this 1% of the 1% are going to want their tasty meals on time. So what happens when they don't get them? Will these dark web masters come find Steve and figure out what's going on? Will they go after the final girls? I mean, they probably have backups upon backups of people because it's the dark web that we're talking about. I also think that this whole experience is definitely going to bond the girls forever. And in my mind, they're just living their best lives somewhere on a beach sipping martinis. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought about this film. What are your thoughts and opinions on it? Let me know. All right, friends, that's gonna be it for me in this video. And if you like these kinds of videos, I have an entire playlist dedicated to horror movie reviews in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you've made it this far. And you guys can follow me on my social medias if you want to. And I'll see you guys soon.